All right, we are live. Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and welcome everybody to today's show. I made my major announcement yesterday on LinkedIn. I told you on our last episode that I am no longer with Spring Big. I am now the Vice President of Business Development for Ricky Williams' new cannabis brand, Heisman. I am very excited to share all of this with you as it unfolds, but definitely check us out. You can find it at Heisman.co and Heisman.official on Instagram. So now I'm in the mix. Now maybe I'll get a little bit smarter on the cannabis industry, can have some better conversations, but I'm very excited for that, for the day job. For those of you who are worried about the show, it's not going anywhere. We're staying right here. This is one of my favorite things to do. This is my hobby. And we will be bringing you multiple episodes every week for the foreseeable future. So you guys are stuck with me. Of course, if you miss any of those episodes, you can check them out at youtube.com/elevateyourgrind, or you can find us recorded anywhere that you find your podcasts, right? Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeart, you guys know the list. Of course, this episode is brought to you by Contempo Specialty Packaging. You guys know it. Packaging in the cannabis industry sucks. There's like one or two people that have some decent packaging. Everything else is a bunch of garbage. It's a bunch of waste. There's like 19 layers between me and my product, and it's just not good. We need to get better. And that is where Contempo Specialty Packaging comes in, with their packaging made from 100% hemp. That's right, folks. We're finally wrapping cannabis within cannabis. And this is the sustainability that this industry promotes. Contempo comes from a 40-year packaging background, servicing the top brands in the world of fashion, and has over 4 years of cannabis packaging experience. They work with many of the largest operators in the space, and their 100% hemp packaging is only one of their many offerings. You do the hemp packaging, they've got plenty of other packaging for you guys to choose from. If you're looking for beautiful child-resistant packaging made from 100% hemp, or any of the other great options for all of your cannabis products, please visit contempopackaging.com. It is contempopackaging.com. Hopefully in the next episode, we will actually have some samples that we can share with you, so I can show you how beautiful this packaging is. But until then, head over to contempopackaging.com and tell them that Todd sent you. All right, folks. I'm very excited for our guest today because he is been around for a very, very long time. He is probably a little bit more behind the scenes. So when I mention the name of the company, you may not know the name of it, but the companies that they work with, you're going to know all of them, right? These guys, there's a group of people that I kind of stumbled upon. One of them has been on the show already, and they just really helped jumpstart the cannabis industry in the place where it's been before it was well legal. One of those people have been on the show, Case Mandel. As part of that episode, he happened to mention today's guest as a huge inspiration for him, and you know, a lot of different things. I've come across today's guest. I hosted what the hell was it called? The Summer Emerge. I was the host for that, and he was on like 1,900 panels, I think, or either that they were promoting his panel so much that is one of the only names that I ever said. So without any further ado, please welcome the founder and president of ArcataX, Lizandro Salazar. Lizandro, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. Just to let you know, it's pronounced ArcataX. We're located in Arcata, which is kind of like the heart of Humboldt County. It's like right in the middle, where back in the day, all the seed breeders and stuff like that would show up and try to like trade seeds and get clones. So they'd go back. Even guys from Amsterdam would come to Arcata. So it's kind of like the hub of like old school cannabis in our mind. Like what Amsterdam is to Europe, Arcata potentially could be to the United States.
Dude, so yeah, I mean, you know, I'm just saying it with an East Coast accent, man. I'm just kidding. I screwed that one up, and that's on me. So that's honestly though, but that point you just made is part of the reason why I'm so excited to talk to you, right? I've gotten so wrapped up in the cannabis industry, right? And you know, we try to do our best to understand the origins of it. The people have kind of cut their teeth so the rest of us can play in the industry, right? A lot of us were hiding as doctors and lawyers and accountants and everything else until it was okay to come out. But there was a lot of people who decided, who forever have been in this industry and risked a lot for it, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to talk to you about those people, about Humboldt County. I know I see Sam and Case, there's always a ton of reference to Humboldt. You guys are proud people of Humboldt. So I would love to kind of understand more about the area, understand why it's so great, the heritage there, what, the people that are there, because sometimes they get a bad rap when you look at things like Murder Mountain and you associate it with people on ATVs with ARs, and everything else like that, where you talk about a seed exchange, doesn't seem like, everyone's in that boat. So give me a little bit of your background. I know that you came here, and I think you moved to Santa Cruz in about 2009. Tell me, or in that area, just kind of give me your background and how you ended up in the cannabis space, at least being in the area that you're in.
Yeah. So, I mean, take it right back. My mom was a foreign exchange student. She was at Santa Barbara back in the 80s, and she was super fond of South America. And so she was doing foreign exchange stuff in Peru, believe it or not. And this was like 83, and met my dad. And so she was just teaching down there, met my dad in the library. I ended up coming around in 1985, and then she flew me back to kind of her home, which was the Santa Cruz area in 1986. So I actually grew up in Santa Cruz from like 1986 all the way like 25 years, and ended up making my way up to Humboldt in about 2009 for a little festival called Reggae on the River. This was kind of like a fabled party, and it was all kind of underground back then. Like, this was, I mean, there was definitely the internet, but
you brought Case to this event, right? Because he tells a very similar story too.
Yeah. So I had been going, like, here's the thing, like in Santa Cruz, we were smoking a ton of weed, and like, there were strains like Blue Dream actually came from Santa Cruz. And I remember when OG was like just a super coveted like clone that was coming from Santa Cruz mountains. I don't know if you're familiar with WAM, WAMM, Valerie Corral, but she was like one of the very, very first farms that were like somewhat legal. This was a medicinal farm back in the day. And this was up in Bonnie Doon, which to us was like 10, 15 minutes away. Mm-hmm. So this was like cannabis culture for us, skating, surfing, growing weed, smoking weed. This was like what we were up to. We were geeking out, looking at like the Canna Bibles from Jason King, like learning about every strain, just like going just deep on it. And then, some of my friends, had some friends up in Garberville, their parents, like, hippies and whatnot, had friends up in Gville. And so we ended up like maybe 2006, we took like a little pilgrimage, just all jumped into the car and went to check out reggae. And it was just insane. Like everyone was just smoking. This was before it was legal, but you would be there, you'd be rolling up joints and all this stuff. And it was fine. So like, that was just my like kind of entry into Humboldt. And then in 2009, when I was up there with Case, we realized after having like worked with a crew called Parking Crew as a volunteer thing, that there was actually like this other part of the industry, which I had never even considered. Like we all just grew for our own kind of personal back in the day. Like I wasn't like selling pounds or anything like that. And so one of our kind of like lead guys, he was just like, so, do you guys want to do some work? And we're like, work? What do you mean? And he kind of like puts his little fingers up like this. And I was like, oh shit, I know what that means. That's trimming. And so me and Case ended up going back to Santa Cruz. We started basically like looking at our lives there. We were kind of breaking even on everything. Like we weren't really getting ahead. Like it was really expensive to live in Santa Cruz, like with rent and everything, still is. And so we sat down one day, and I just remember being like, dude, like I think we can go up there and like change our lives a little bit. And he's like, whoa, like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, dude. He's like, do you think we can maybe make like $10,000? And I was like, I think we can make like $10,000. And so like at that point, like that was a lot of money. He was working like doing a gym membership. Like I was, doing rain catchment and like sustainable design stuff, but barely making ends meet. And so we like literally just sold most of our shit, got rid of our rentals. I ended up buying a truck. He bought a truck, and then we drove up to basically the middle of nowhere, and had some scissors, and basically for the next few months worked on a pot farm, just trimming like for months and months and months, and realized like, oh wow, like there's a lot more to this. There's a lot of opportunity. And so that was kind of my initiation into Humboldt. And yeah, this was like a whole like neighborhood of old school growers that have been up there since, the 90s. They had multiple 100-acre parcels. They were growing massive plants, and it was like a really cool, tight knit community up there. And that was Titlow Hill, which is right now kind of not what it used to be. Lots changed since then, but that was kind of like my origin story for getting up into Humboldt, and that was just the beginning.
That's crazy, man. I mean, it's such a cool story and such kind of like still following the old school dynamic of what the American dream is just finding an opportunity and going all in on it. So, you kind of give your timeline, born in 85, come to Santa Cruz, 86. I was born a year after you were born on the East Coast of the United States, suburban New Jersey, and then eventually South Florida. So I'm curious, how did you get into cannabis in general in the beginning? Was it just because to me, I talk to folks like you out there, it just seems to me like it's a different culture, like that the stigma out in especially Central California didn't exist. It was a lot more accepted and relaxed amongst parents and kids. I've talked to people like Pete Furtado and his dad from Big Pete Street, same
Oh, yeah.
thing, they just grew up around it and it was part of their life. And that's so foreign to me because I grew up in dare culture and don't touch it and it's bad for you. We all make the joke like I thought a lot more people were going to offer me free drugs growing up because I saw it on Dare, but nobody did, right? But so that's my thing is I'm curious, is it just a lot more accepted in the general culture out there?
Well, that's funny you mentioned Big Pete because me and Case back like were there right when they were starting to get going, like in Pete's house on the west side in Santa Cruz, going to Costco, getting butter, mixing it in the crock pot. Like we were trimming his like indoor. They were putting the trim into the crock pot, making cookies, going out to San Jose, all over the place, delivering. This was like old school stuff.
Yeah.
And I think what it was, especially in Santa Cruz, like the cost of living was really high. And so a lot of the families that had kind of like been there for generations didn't necessarily have like these big tech jobs and all this stuff. So there was kind of like this underground, like growing scene, and people were just growing it to kind of sell it to make ends meet in their backyards. So like the surf culture, bunch of guys you would just like not see for a few months, and you wonder like, where the heck are they going? They'd go up into the hills, they'd grow their crop, they'd come back, and then they'd sell it. And so, a lot of parents were growing in their garages, just to kind of like be able to make ends meet for their kids. And so there was definitely some more laid back families. My mom was not like that. Like I got caught for like growing like a plant in her house when I was 16, and I was like bullshitting. I was like, oh, I'm doing it for research at college. And it was like a one lighter, and I had like one plant, and it was just bad news. So she wasn't super into that because she was a teacher. She was promoting Dare and all that stuff. But for the most part, it was just like a laid back kind of community, and a lot of people just kind of embraced that herb as part of their life. And so that I think was just something that I grew up in, and it was kind of like maybe came generations before I was there.
No, and I think that's great. I had a conversation with a friend of mine today, kind of saying like this friend that I had a conversation with had been, he smoked when he was a kid, started, early in high school and everything else. He's also, it's hard for me to say without my friends realizing who it is, trying not to throw anybody under the bus that's not in this industry, but he's also my most successful friend, like by far. So, the more and more I talk to him, I sit and I say, knowing his personality and everything else, is like, I get the weed with you. I get why you've been able to use it for so long. Mm-hmm. And I get why it doesn't affect you negatively. And when I say that, I mean, big picture. Yeah. Sometimes he smokes too much in a current sitting and he's a little lethargic, but ultimately it's not ruining his life, not even coming close. In fact, I would even, argue in the opposite direction. So, it's always interesting to me, the people that found it earlier on and figured out how it actually helped them, because a lot of people ask me, the effects and everything else, and if I'll use it during the day and if I can work on it and everything else. And I tell them, I'm like, personally, it took me a very long time to get to this point. A lot of trial and error, a lot of trying different cultivars and everything else. And I feel, like people do your wine countries in your backyard as well too. Like people do with wines, like you become passionate about it and you're willing to put in the time and effort, and then when you see the actual benefits, you realize that was worth it. I'm jealous of someone like you who got to do that much earlier in their life and get to a point where it wasn't just, especially when you're buying from the black or gray market back in the day on the East Coast here and just picking up whatever they gave you and you didn't know how it was going to affect you. And when I say that, I mean more of a, is this going to make me lazy or is it going to make me focused, like that kind of way? So, I look at folks like you and Case and Pete and everybody else, and I get jealous that you had, and I'll call it an education earlier in life.
Yeah. And honestly, it was kind of a crash course because, back then we were trying to get as stoned as we could.
Yeah.
Like we were making, we were growing our weed, we were trimming it, we were making solventless. I remember when bubble bags came out and we were like, oh my God, we sprinkle this on the bowl. And before you knew it, it was getting a little too extreme. We're like, oh shit, all we're doing right now is after school, we'd play music and we would get super stoned and then we go skate and we do all this stuff. And I realized I could literally do that whole lifestyle forever and not get anywhere. And so going up into Humboldt and being able to realize oh, whoa, we're in the industry, but we're working, we're working hard. And this whole new motivation crept over me. I was like, this isn't just about smoking it and getting super stoned and just kind of going neutral and just living the good life. This is something that if you work with well and you have discipline around it, it can change your life, financially. And so that was a total transition from early on Santa Cruz, just smoking as much as we could all day, every day. I remember there was years that went by and I didn't remember not smoking. And I was like, oh shit. And so being able to get out of that kind of consistent consumption to the point of that was all we were living for, I think was a big thing. And I think for any smoker and consumer right now who's thinking, hey, this is cool to smoke all day, every day, all day, every day. I would ask them maybe to try a little something different and figure out when's the best time to smoke and why are you smoking? Not just because it's an habitual pattern, but because it can help you for specific things at specific times. But I don't run my company high as a kite. I can't. I'm not high right now. I got to be on point certain times, but at other times I can be creative, I can be meditative, I can use it to relax. But I really don't think that is the be all end all, and you should just be breathing it in like it's air.
Yeah.
Because that's dishonoring the plant in my mind.
I'm in the exact same boat as you. I think, depending on the task at hand, and there's a quantity to take in, there are certain days where you wake up, like you said, running your company, you may not smoke now, but if you wake up and you just have a bout of anxiety and a hit's going to put that on the back burner so you can focus on what you need to do to make sure your company's running properly, that's very appropriate versus I'm going to see 2 stand-up shows next week. I'm going to be you in college or you in high school again. That's just the appropriateness of that particular situation. But moving kind of past this, and I'm sure we'll absolutely fall back into it, but so you and Case get up to Humboldt and you're trimming, you get rid of a lot of the things you have. How do you kind of take that? Was that kind of your undergrad, if you will, where you kind of learn the ins and outs, figured it out? And I mean, at some point, you two went on an entrepreneurial journey where it's you started trimming. We think we can change this. We're going to work with these people. And at some point it had to be hey man, we can do this on our own. Talk to me about how that experience went.
Well, yeah, no, you're right on, because at that point we were free agents. We're independent contractors. You have your own tools, you have your list of contacts, you have your own specific quality guidelines that you have to meet in order to basically stay on the job. You have specific volume hit amounts that you have to hit. And we were going above and beyond every day because we just knew hey, the longer we work, the better we work, the more contacts we'll get, meaning the more farmers we're going to be able to work for. And so just being able to know, wait, this isn't just some 9 to 5 where you're getting paid hourly. Everything that you're doing right now is benefiting you directly. And so it really taught us, I think, that you get what you put in, straight up. And we saw that to be true because later on, years later, fast forward after working all these other jobs, cultivation manager, being able to run a farm, being able to build a farm, actually selling some of this work that we were putting together. a lot of these early farmers who were our bosses actually ended up being investors in our companies once this stuff became legal, because like, man, your guys' work ethic is insane. Like we would be working 16-hour days every day and like do this for months, and then cash management. It's like, oh shit, you're making all this cash, you better not go spend it all. We saw that happening left and right, where people would just trim, and then they go travel for 8 months, come back broke, trim, come back broke. And in Case and I were like, no, this is like the only opportunity we're ever gonna get that's gonna make this much money at this age. And so, saving all of that, and then a lot of those funds ended up becoming seed capital for our early, investment into ArcataX. So it was definitely like a crash course in like independent contracting and just being totally sovereign over your own destiny,
See, that's really cool because, the way that you talk about it, it seemed like, I don't want to say a model, but it seemed like this was almost like, and this is a completely uneducated guess, but almost like the crab fishing model, where they get paid a few times a year, they spend the money, and when they need more money, they come back and do it again. And you and Case could have easily fell into that mold, made a bunch of money, maybe gone back to Santa Cruz, gone back every time you needed money. Let me ask you a question along those lines. Before you went over there, did you ever envision yourself as an entrepreneur, as someone who was going to create their own business from scratch, or that just kind of the more and more you got into this, you just saw the opportunity and it kind of found you?
Yeah, I mean, what I really valued at that point was freedom. And when I realized that like having the freedom to choose when you wanted to work, choose when you didn't want to work, and choose how hard you wanted to work, that was something I could never go back from. And so it was, I think the essence of entrepreneurialism is kind of this freedom to choose what you're going to do and what you can do in this world of endless opportunities. And so I don't know if I like walked in thinking like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm being entrepreneurial. But as soon as I realized that there was this like freedom to like be able to create my own destiny, and kind of make my way through this rat race without having to climb some bullshit ladder, I think, I just kind of realized like, oh shit, this is something that I can make work.
Dude, I mean, I love it because, what people don't realize is being an entrepreneur, and I don't mean that in the way that you see it in textbooks and everything else, is really the ultimate rebel move, because society tells you to go and get your formal education and go get a good job and be safe and not have that risk tolerance. Being an entrepreneur is the rebel move, because it might be a home run. You might be homeless. You don't know what's going to happen. And just because you hit a home run at your first at bat doesn't mean that you're going to continue to hit home runs. So, you're experiencing it more than I am. So it's crazy. Like, people associate entrepreneurship a lot with like the man and the system. At the end of the day, those are the people who have freedom. Those are the people that can say and do what they want and can take a Tuesday off and spend it with their family. But it's on them. Is the risk of what's going to happen to the business worth the reward of spending it with your family that day? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So, it's almost like, to me, and it's funny, I think Elon Musk said it recently, that most drug dealers understand business than most MBAs or Ivy League grads or something like that. And that couldn't have been further from the truth. Not that you need to be a drug dealer, but you just need to kind of see the opportunity where it's like, this is my path out, right? And it sounds like, you saw that, especially once you got to Humboldt.
Yeah, and I think see the opportunity is the key. Like a lot of times, like but I've seen society essentially make people behave like they only act when told to act.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, no one told me to do that, so I didn't do that. And it's like, well, if you would have thought a little outside the box and took the initiative to think, oh, maybe I should do this, you might have gotten a little bit further. And so being able to identify these opportunities and take that initiative, I think is really like that entrepreneurial like essence, is like, no one's going to do it for you. And like being able to take time off. Like I don't fucking take time off. Like the last 5 years, I took almost 0 days off. I just took like one vacation but there's this like different kind of energy that comes through when you're like running a team of like 50 people and you realize like, this is all me. Like, I can't just like wake up late and like not make that call and just kind of like diddle through this day. Like, I have to create constantly. But when you kind of see the results of that, like you get this new energy that comes through, and it's just this kind of like fire where you're like, holy shit, like it's me against the world, and like this is my team, and like we're out here to win. And I don't know, it's kind of just this competitive like warrior spirit that comes through that I never felt when I was working for other people. It just didn't feel the same, you know?
No, I can't agree with you more. I mean, I've gotten there a little bit now with Heisman and with the podcast, but 100%, when you, and especially when you find something that you actually love to do, a lot of people find something they're good at, but they don't love it. It just happens to make them a lot of money and they have to be good at it. I mean, I was a victim of that for 8 years in the IT world. And, it's funny. I talk to friends of mine that are getting new jobs and they're basically getting the same fucking job over and over again with a different company and expect not to be miserable after a year or two. And I'm just like, I couldn't wait to get out of it.
Right.
Turning this back on you, you have an amazing company in the cannabis space. You work with the biggest brands in California. I mean, you told me who you were on the phone with before we got on here. I don't need to mention it, but
Right.
you and Case and the rest of the guys that went from let's take a chance on this, let's move up there, let's be trimmers, let's do it smarter and hold on to our money so we can continue to build on this. You might have kind of touched on a little bit, but at what point do you go from like, hey man, I've got an idea for a business? And because it doesn't sound like you were around a lot of extraction back then. And from what I understand it,
Yeah.
much more profitable business than flower.
Well, it's interesting that you ask, because at the time when we were just like ArcataX was just a figment of, like, we hadn't even named it, like it wasn't anything, it was just an extraction facility. I was working on a farm in southern Humboldt. We had just like built it from scratch, and we had got all of our shit together in terms of like water documentation, all of this documentation to work with Humboldt County. And it was a beautiful farm, and it was with one of my partners who is actually from Santa Cruz as well. And believe it or not, we got a tip from somebody, and the tip basically said like, oh, this farm is going to get raided, like your farm's going to get raided. And my partner and I, like, what the fuck, like we're doing everything right, like how are we getting raided? And he was like a really smart cat, so he's like, no dude, this is weird, like I don't know what's going on. And so he was just like making sure everything was dialed in, everything was perfect. Like they had not given any permits out yet, but like we were in the process. We were working with all the engineering companies who were doing all the right things supposedly. And I guess it wasn't enough, because one morning we rolled down. It was like 7 a.m. I was living up at the top of a mountain with a little tiny house next to the farm just to kind of like protect it. And fucking all of these cops were there, and water board and fish and wildlife, all these people were there. And I'm like, okay, this is weird. And I walk up to the gate and they're like, oh, is this such and such house, or is this such and such? And I'm like, no, that's not me. And they're like, is this such and such address? And I was like, yeah. And then they like literally pulled out a gun and put it at my head. Ooh. And I was like, what are you doing? And they're like, put your hands around your back, blah, blah, blah. So next thing you know, like we're in handcuffs. And we're sitting there, we're like, what the fuck is this? And they're like going around the farm, like basically about to cut it down. And at that point we had no idea, but we were actually the first farm that had gone through this permitting process to get raided in Humboldt County. And at that point I was like, whoa, like we did everything right to the T. Like they ended up letting us go, like they made a mistake, but I was like, we did everything to the T. Like solar panels, like cover crop, like everything was perfect. Like tiny houses, there was like no trace of like any trash anywhere. Everything was organic. And I'm like, we still are getting fucked with. And so I remember just kind of like after that day, walking it back up to the mountain and being like, man, I don't know if cultivation is the right choice. And that was at the same time that Case had found this spot. It was like the first spot in Humboldt County that was going to allow extraction. And I didn't know anything about extraction, but I did know about design. I did know about like systems. And so, he basically hit me up. He's like, hey, do you think you want to invest, and we can basically get this thing going. And I was like, sure. And so literally taught myself how to like do this whole thing while I was working on the farm, basically preparing for like this farm, like it being the last year ever. And I had been a farm person for like a decade before that. Like after 2009, like I trimmed a few years, but then I went straight into cultivation and was just living off grid and cultivating like my whole life, which I loved. And but then I was just like, oh shit, like this isn't working. So because I wasn't at the point where I wanted to take any more risks in cultivate or in cannabis other than cultivation. Like guys were extracting their garages, blowing up. Like I wasn't that guy. I didn't want to do that. That was a little too sketch for me. It was like federal offense shit. And so, but when we heard it was going to go legal, I was like, all right, let's get it done. And it was literally just because like, I want to stay in cannabis. I'm having, not a good, like, I'm not seeing that cultivation is really working right now. Like I don't have 100 acres, 200, 300 acres, just like up in the middle of the woods where I can do this kind of pre-existing cultivation. But I do have engineering background. There is this like, 2,500 square foot spot, and we're ahead of the race. So let's get it done. And man, it was just like a year of learning, a year of design. We met with the fire marshals. Like we were just literally putting it all together the best that we thought we could. And yeah, lo and behold, we got the first Type 7 license, and we're the first operational volatile extraction company, I think in Northern California back in 2018 after all that. It's crazy.
It's an incredible story because I know people that were involved early on in the industry that went through raids and were arrested, not justly, and they left the industry. They, after a few years, they're like, you know what? A good friend of mine, Ryan, that I worked with at a company, he had one of the first retailers out in the desert, and he's just like, it wasn't worth it. I wasn't worth it. And he's just now starting to enter back into the industry. I remember talking to Sparky Rose with Compassionate Caregivers in Oakland, going to jail and then being approached after the fact and staying away from the cannabis industry for years and then finally coming back in. So, that moment in time where you roll up to the farm and you see all those cops there and everything else, you could have easily said like, hey man, like, I've given it my all, but I'm doing everything right and I still can't win, and just hung it up. Was it just that you're so damn passionate about cannabis? You're like, I got to stay here. I got to figure out a way to stay here.
I think really what it was is the way I justified it was, this is a plant. This is a plant that is growing outside, and we're not doing anything wrong. Like, this just so happens to be like a remnant of the past, from the 1940s, DuPont Chemical, Henry Anslinger. Like I had done a lot of research back in college about like why cannabis became illegal to begin with. And it was all fuckery.
Yep.
And I was just like, okay, so like, yeah, sure. Law enforcement has to uphold the law. That's what they do. That's what they're trained to do. You can't like blame them for it. But in my mind, fundamentally, what we were doing was not wrong. And I felt like we were protected. Like I felt that like the better we did business, the more like sustainable methods we used, like the better it felt, the better the vibe was. And so even when, the cops raided us, like I felt protected. Like we got let go, they didn't cut down our crop. And so I just kind of knew. I was just like, hey, like if you keep doing things right, and knowing that you're not doing anything wrong, like at the end of the day, like, justice will prevail, and, and end up somewhat prevailing. Now I'll say that like the risks that we took back then and the ways that we were trained to like not talk and to not market and to not advertise have come to kind of bite a lot of us in the ass now, because it's like, you got to be the opposite. But man, like it was definitely more like a subconscious feeling like, this is the right path. We're not doing anything wrong. There might be some bumps along the way, but you just got to keep forging forward,
No, man, I love the story. Like I really do love the origin story of, and I love the little group that you guys have in Humboldt with you and Sam and Case and Pete. You guys are all just honestly seem like great people. You've been nothing but kind to me. You guys all seem to have each other's backs. You're like the comedy store of cannabis, if you will, right? You know, just that group that kind of runs it behind the scenes. You know, talk to me a little bit more about the company. So you went from the cultivation into the extraction. You guys are the first ones
Mhm.
in Humboldt County, potentially Northern California. I imagine this is a time where, you know, not a lot of companies know what they're doing as far as putting cannabis out there. I feel like there is a lot of disconnect between cultivators and brands, and if people are going to be vertically integrated. I just feel like, you know, not a lot of people knew what they were doing. And even though you have a good product out there, are you putting that under your own umbrella and putting it in stores? Are you going to white label it for other people? You know, to me, I can see where you ended up, and it's a beautiful model, but you
Right.
know, that model wasn't so definite when you started.
Yeah, I mean, it transitioned quite a bit. I mean, Case had been working on Cannabis early, like 2016, 2018. Like they had launched their brand. They were out around like California trying to sell to retailers. He's like, dude, this is hard. Like this industry is so unsophisticated. Like there's not enough shops. Like there's not enough consumers. And so he was like, yeah, we could try to become a brand, but like right now with the state of the industry being so emergent and just
Yeah.
not really, he's like, we don't want to do that. So part of like the initiation of this company was a contract that we did with True Humboldt. True Humboldt was like one of the original distributors in California, and it was a company founded basically by our old bosses from the trim days, and it was just like a consortium of like 200 farms that had to establish some pipelines from Northern California to Southern California. And at that point, crude oil was like the big thing, you know, and it was trading for like $5 a gram. Now it's like literally like less than a buck. But we had these large machines. You know, we ended up partnering with a manufacturer of BHO equipment, basically, and so we had these massive machines, and we had this input from True Humble that they would give to us, and so we just extracted as a service early on. Give us the material, we'll extract it, we'll give you back the oil. It's just a certain, you know, dollar per gram. We have zero liability, and you guys do sales, you guys do procurement, and so it was just a very simple, like low risk model, and that was like how we originally got started. We would just extract for people, give it back to them, and that was it. And then as we started seeing the commoditization occur, some people started going upside down. Unfortunately, they'd get material that was dirty, then that would get extracted, then that would just like, you know, concentrate the pesticides, so then they'd get their crude back and it would fail, so then they wouldn't be able to pay their bills, or they would get some low yield and realize, oh my god, like I can't even sell this for a profit. And so we started understanding like, oh shit, like if our clients are having issues, this might be something that isn't working anymore now that it's commoditizing. And that was one thing that I was really trying to steer clear of, was like being in this commodities market, because I always saw cannabis as like more than just a number. I saw it more of it as a medicine. So, you know, we started transitioning out of this like toll processing crude oil model, and then started looking into like premium extracts and creating like live resin, which was like total other side of the spectrum when it
Yeah.
came to like, you know, what extraction was about. And that's kind of been, that was an inflection point as well in terms of the company.
So, I mean, for me, from the outside looking in, you know, the premium model I see is almost an obvious choice, mainly for the fact that you guys are in the Napa of cannabis, if you will, right? From as I understand it, Humboldt has some of the best weed in the country, if not the world, right? Now, having said that, most of the people have told me that are from Humboldt, so you know it's a little bit biased, but I've
Right.
had some stuff from around there. Again, I didn't know my shit early on. The last time I was in California was 2019 before the pandemic, so you know, it's like, hey, this is a Cuban cigar. Is it
Mm,
though? Or
mm,
did you just put the Cohiba label on it? Right. So, but having said that, you know, when you look around you and you have access to some of these very well educated growers, the people who kind of gave you your education. I
mhm,
mean, was that where you had the idea? It's like, hey, we've got this great flower here. Great input means even better output.
mm,
And candidly, you know, I remember around 2018, I was still very much a closet smoker in my social circle, and especially my family and everything else. So when I saw the vape cartridges come out, and it was a very easy, discreet way to smoke without the smell around. I mean, I remember my brother-in-law and sister-in-law moved into my house with me when I
Right.
used to smoke a ball on the couch, and I had to switch to a vape cartridge because they weren't allowed to know that I smoked, right? So the vape cartridge, I'm like, oh my God, this is a game changer. And then I bought so many different brands trying to find one that came even relatively close to flower, and it was just not good. So kind of going back to that, I feel like you saw the opportunity with the rise of like vape cartridges and kind of more discreet delivery mechanisms, and then knowing that you had access to, some of the best in the world, that
Right.
maybe that kind of drew up itself from a business standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of realized, listen, if we're in this region, like we need to be complementary to the things that are in this region. And so even though the market isn't necessarily as large in the premium space, it's a niche that we're strategically located to
Well,
be able to leverage.
I saw something, they say like 20% of consumers buy 80% of product. And I imagine those people are buying a good amount of premium product.
You know, I don't necessarily know if that's true. I definitely know there's a huge segment of daily consumers who do spend the majority of their paycheck on cannabis. A lot of these guys are smoking solventless and so on and so forth. But I will also say there's a very large portion of consumers that are just buying for potency,
Yeah.
and they don't necessarily care as much about the appellation, the region, the strain uniqueness. They're really just kind of like, I'm buying for numbers.
Yeah.
I'm a big pothead, and I need to be able to keep my habit going. So I'm gonna buy what's cheapest and what's most potent. And so yeah, it's something that, like, in our region, like, our brand is very well known. It's doing extremely well. But if you go all the way down to LA, to a place that is mostly ran by, indoor cultivators, and they've never necessarily tried a product that's super premium before, and they don't really know why it's like what makes it super premium or why that's important. There's just a lot of education to be done,
Yeah.
and I think that's the same for cultivation, for people who make flower, the same for extractors up in this region. There's still so much education that needs to be done. Like, we're in, like, inning number 2 of who knows how many.
No, and the more that I learn, the more I realize I don't know, right? I keep trying to figure out terpene profiles and the different cannabinoids and everything else, and what means what. And, a year ago, I honestly felt like I knew more than I know today. Maybe that was, and I believe that was purely out of ignorance. Or I'm like, oh, I know the cannabinoids, I know the terpene profiles, and this, and that, and the other.
Right,
And then I
right.
started talking to people like you, and you talk about the difference between outdoor grown and indoor, and the THC levels and THC levels.
Mhm.
To me, and I've kind of, this is what I've told people from a THC standpoint, the higher the percentage for me personally, I feel like the effects just last longer. I
Mm,
don't feel like it gets me to a different place from a different high or anything else. I just feel like the more THC, like,
mm,
maybe if it's lower, it'll last an hour. If it's higher,
mm,
it'll last 3 hours, 3.5 hours. Again, that's just my blind observation. I'm
mm.
curious to understand from someone like you, what are the advantages of indoor versus outdoor? Because to me, I feel like LA, Southern California, it's very much high THC numbers, whereas Northern California, and if you're going to do outdoor, from what I understand, it helps with the terpenes and
Mm,
and you have a higher percentage of terps, and you get more of a full profile, and
mm.
it's a different type of like full spectrum that way. And I know I may not be using the proper terms, but can you kind of give us some insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. We still don't know how to test for all the stuff that's in these oils. So, like, for instance, like, some of the founders at SC Labs are buddies of mine, and we're pushing the envelope constantly on our terp profiles and our different expressions of some of these plants that we go and find in the middle of the hills. And these are some of the things that we know about, right? So, like, we can test for X amount of terpenes, we can test for X amount of cannabinoids. But if you look at as many COAs as I do, which is a lot, you start looking at you start looking at the math and the total breakdown, and there's still like 10 to 20% of this oil that they still don't have testing around. And I'm like, and we're going to be writing an article for the Rolling Stones on this, but it's just like, what is this like mystical like fraction of this oil that we don't even know what it is? So it's like, it's really hard sometimes to even start the conversation about quality unless you have information about, well, this is exactly what's in the oil. So number one, like we don't even have enough testing to know what is actually in some of these things. We have theories about it, but when we do extraction for indoor specific starting material, what we notice a lot of is high amounts of fats and waxes. So if you're an indoor cultivator, your KPI is basically yield. I want to know how many pounds per light I'm getting, and I want to increase my pounds per light. And so if you're a cultivator, hey, if I got 3 pounds of light, great. But if you're an extractor, you're really only concerned about the oil that's good to smoke. And so, what we've been noticing is like 20 to 30% of per gram of some of this concentrate is fats. So like there's people out there that are rolling up these indoor joints that are literally just smoking on fats, thinking that like this is fire. And so like not only are the terpene profiles less, and not only are the total like micro amounts of terpenes less, so it's just kind of more of like a bland profile, but there's this just whole fraction of lipids that like you only know once you've extracted it and separated it out, and then you're like, holy shit, like people shouldn't be smoking that, right? Yeah. And so that is, the indoor thing. But in terms of outdoor, like what we've noticed is not only the total terpene fractions are much higher, so like our HTE is almost like liquid, like you can just pour it, it's like, whoa, it's like 20-25% total terps. But when you start looking into the actual terpene profiles, we have like up to 30 to 40 different types of terpenes within these little micro amounts. And so those little micro amounts are kind of like the complexity notes that you would see. It's something that I look at, I have theories about. I don't necessarily think that anyone knows exactly like if that's better or this is better. I'm just showing you I'm just telling you what I've seen and what I noticed. And so, yeah, for the most part, it's just more complex, more diverse terpenes, higher amounts of terpenes, lots of different types of cannabinoids rather than, oh, this is just THC. And so that's just a representation, I think, of a plant that's in an environment that's highly complex, and it's in soil that's highly complex, and it's got lots of different minerals and stuff like that ends up correlating to like, some of these essential oils.
I believe you with that too, because to me, there's just something different about it being out in nature, being out in the sun with natural inputs, if you will. There's something, I don't know, there's something just seems very processed about indoor. Now, don't get me wrong, I've had plenty of great indoor weed and it's definitely out there, but to me, I don't know why. And again, I don't know nearly enough to even weigh in on this, but it just seems like there's something that there would be an advantage to outdoor that maybe in the future can be replicated indoor once you understand what those true inputs are. But it is interesting to me to find that out, right? Because you do see the difference in viscosity between different extractors and in the cartridge, right? And how much that moves. I mean, there are some cartridges, you turn them upside down and an hour later, they're still stuck there. And there are other ones within 10 seconds, it's completely there. And, it's funny, you mention all these different terpenes and cannabinoids and everything else. I think, I try to educate myself and I pick stuff. And I live in Florida. So
what part of Florida?
I'm in South Florida. I'm in Delray.
Nice, man. I spent a couple years in South Beach, actually.
Very nice. Yeah, a lot of people do. Great area. I mean, don't get me wrong, we have some shining lights of some strains here that are good, but the overall market, because we don't have there's not a very big free market and competitiveness here, is not that great, right? But my point being is I've gone in to look at a particular strain, knowing the terpene profile is something that I enjoy, a decent THC content, and I smoke, and I'm like, yeah, I didn't like that. Or the opposite way, where it's something I didn't think I would like, and I do like it. So to your point, I feel like even the people that are very educated on it, there's still a whole lot of research and documentation that needs to happen. And I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where it's going to, people have been studying wine for so long
Exactly.
to get to the point to where we are, to understand it as complex as they do. And not saying they haven't been doing that with cannabis, but the documentation is not there, especially not the official documentation, because
Right.
it's been illegal for so long. So that's where I am as a consumer and as someone in this industry. Is I'm very excited, to your point, saying that we are at the beginning of the game, the second inning, to understand all this great stuff about this plant. And it's funny, I enjoy talking to you about this because you can recognize the full spectrum of the people who smoke cannabis, the people who can use it medicinally, the people who can benefit from it. And then there is the minority of just lazy ass stoners. And candidly, I think a bigger portion of their personality trait is the lazy ass, not the stoner part. And, you know, they leverage cannabis to make that excuse, and they kind of give us all a bad name. But, you know, you seem to have very good insight into, you're not one of these blind cannabis people who are like every cannabis user is just. No, there's some shitty people out there, just like there is in any group, right? So, you know, I enjoy that. I forget the point I was trying to make here, as I do when I go on some of these rants. But it's you know, it's interesting. I really do think that, and there are people like you that are putting the education out there. It's what I've really loved about what you've done, though, and talk about it throughout the story, is you always seem to learn by doing, which seems to be really cool, right? And you see an opportunity for yourself, you go and you do the work, you learn from it, and then you can apply it to the situations in your own business and your own life. To your point, when we talked about, and I had brought it up about how this industry was so disjointed, you know, brands were not really a thing. You were told kind of to stay under the radar and not market. You see this industry evolve. You work with a lot of other brands, and now with all that experience, you've made the smart move to launch your own brand because you've seen the mistakes. You've seen what people do right and wrong. You know that you have a good product. Your product has been selling in market, so why not put your name on it finally?
Exactly. Yeah, and honestly, you know, it's funny because cannabis industry is still so young, but like the people who started their brand in 2018 are like the OGs, you
Selling for
know?
like $40 million after
Yeah.
2 years already. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Like the people who literally just like didn't give a shit about their product necessarily and just wanted to get on the shelf. Those guys are like considered like the big dogs. And like there was definitely some brands back then, even pre 2018, that were doing good shit. So don't let me, you know, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
yeah.
But like people like us who waited and who basically were just supplying a lot of these big brands and giving them like the best of the best humbly, right? Not asking for any recognition there. We ended up losing a bunch of times. So then when we launched in like 2020, and trust me, we didn't launch. I told myself we had just sent a bunch of a couple samples into the Emerald Cup, and I was sitting there and I'd made a promise to myself. I said, listen, if we get awards right now, this was like 2020. I said, if we get awards, throw my hat over the wall. We have to do a brand. Like whatever it takes, we got to do it, because if the industry is saying that your product is that good and we don't do it, it's because you're afraid. And so we ended up saying, all right, boom, we got to do it. And we worked for about a year on it. And believe it or not, when we finally got going, we sent in one sample, one cartridge to the Emerald Cup that following year, and we won first place.
Wow.
And so I realized, like, dude, like it's so important to get your product first, get your product down, understand quality, like work hard on your brand. Don't just like slap some silly like symbol on it that's going to remind you of some other, like you're going to get sued anyway. Like we're seeing that happen now.
Yeah.
But you know, the amount of time that it took to get that, now we're really having to go back to these retailers and say, hey, like, good to meet you. You've been buying our products since 2018 through these brands, and we love these brands. They're still our clients for the most part. And here's our own product. And so, you know, just getting through that trust process and getting to know some of these people, since we've been so B2B for so long, is our next challenge, basically.
Very cool, man. Well, I mean, it's got to be exciting now that you finally get to slap, you know, your company's name on a brand. You get to put it in the stores and you get to show the world like, hey, we've been doing this behind the scenes forever. We, you know, there are not too many people in this industry right now that say they can work their way up from the bottom, that somebody was willing to start as a trimmer and go through everything that you've gone through and get to the point where they've launched a brand. That story is very, very rare in this industry. There might be the person like you that linked up with someone from Wall Street and got a bunch of money, and then, you know, the Wall Street person is the face of the company, but you don't see people like you and Kate. That's why I look at the brands like you and Big Pete's and Cannabis, and like there's such an authenticity to it because you guys are real. And you know, when I talk to each one of you, you're so willing to help each other out. You mentioned Cannabis on this call. I mean, those are two brands that I love. I haven't been out to California to try yours yet, but I told you I'm still, what, 2-3 years later, still searching for that perfect vape cartridge. You all suck vape cartridges. Listen, they're as good as they can be, but you know, I still haven't found the one that makes it feel like I'm smoking a joint. So I will be out in California in 2 weeks. Are you guys in Southern California yet?
Yeah, so we are in, like, you know, there's some deliveries that carry us down in SoCal. In San Diego, we've got, you know, quite a bit of presence. Yeah, it's just, you know, we launched in March. You know, we're in August right now. It takes time to get out there. You know, you got to give samples to all these bud tenders, and then you got to wait for them to sell through some of their old inventory in order to pick you up. And so, I mean, you don't have to wait to come out to California. I could definitely probably try to get something out there if
No, you can have it waiting for me at the hotel in California. We'll leave it at that.
There you go. But yeah, anytime, man. Like, but yeah, going back to the legacy thing, like, it's something that, you know, believe it or not, there's still hundreds, if not thousands, of cultivators that are still struggling trying to make it. And they're not even thinking about brand. They're thinking about, oh my God, how much am I going to sell my pounds for this year?
Yeah.
And how am I going to, like, pay for all these taxes and all these license fees and my property payment and my payroll. And so, you know, there's, like, when you're an extractor, you're actually representing, like, a whole community of farmers, right? Because we don't grow this material. Like, we extract it well, and we put it into this brand, Arcata Fire. But behind that brand, there's probably 50 to 100 farmers. And so our success is their success. And so, like, being able to, like, stand up and be like, hey, these were the farmers that supported us when we were basically kids. These were the guys that were giving us money that to fund our own companies, to fund our own brands. Like, this is a responsibility we have to, like, our elders, basically our bosses back in the day, who, you know, haven't really been schooled in marketing and branding and advertising. And pretty much most of these guys are working on their farms, like, 24/7. They don't have time to get on these calls and, you know, do all these podcasts and stuff like that. Some of them do, but not all of them. So it's like a responsibility that we owe to that older generation who kind of supported us, taught us what we know. And, you know, being of service in that way is just another one of those motivating drivers, I think, that gets me up every morning to try to see what we can do to teach the consumer and to put it as best of a product as we can out there.
This is a perfect model for young entrepreneurs, not only in cannabis, to follow, is to take care of the people who took care of you on the way up, you know, and if you have the ability, you know, you had that entrepreneurial spirit, maybe if you knew it or not, you were able to figure out a way to turn your passion into a successful business, one that's known in the industry. And now you do have the ability to help those people and you're doing it. I mean, that's how capitalism is supposed to work. And that's the best side of it right there. And, you know, like I said, I think you guys are doing a great job showing that. I'm really excited to check out the brand and learn more about it. And the fact that you guys are launching with 12 different strains, as I saw on the website, of live resin. I mean, I think it's the best product on the market right now. I think that's, you know, one of the quickest expanding categories. And I think I don't think I'm the only one who's looking for a better vape cartridge. There are some good ones out there, but I feel like everybody is working towards that goal.
Yeah, I think so too. And you know, there's so many different types of formulations when you're making vapes. Like, a lot of companies are really just trying to get the largest bang for your buck, which is like, how do I get the most potency for the cheapest price? And then there's other companies that are out there trying to like figure out, okay, well, how am I gonna, you know, make the biggest margin? And for us, it's like, how do we get the biggest flavor burst into your mouth that reminds you of like what the plant smells like, not when it's already been dried and in the jar, but if you're going to this farm, you're seeing this live plant and you're putting your nose up to it and you're squishing the bud. That's the essence that we're trying to capture. And I don't even know if you've ever tried anything like that before, but if you haven't, it's absolutely exquisite. It blows even flower, just like I used to smoke a lot of flower, like, but when I go and smoke a joint now, I'm going, oh my God, where'd all the flavor go? This is crazy.
That's fun.
And yeah, and so yeah, it's just like, you know, just so much intensity of not only flavor, but also like that high that seems to be just a little different, not as hazy, a lot more inspirational and creative. But
now you're speaking my language.
Yeah. So yeah, man, I mean, anytime, like we have, you know, 30 different flavors right now that we're running. A lot of these things have never even been on the market before in terms of these profiles. So
well, not this upcoming trip, but the next time we get out to California, which with the launch of our brand will be many, many times, man, I'm gonna have to come up and see you guys. I know Eric wants to see you guys as well too, so we'll make that happen for sure.
absolutely. No, we definitely have tours all the time. We'll pop jars. You'll basically get to smell, taste your way through our kind of vault, so to speak. And yeah, a lot of these farms are only like 30 minutes away from our facility. So that's one cool thing. Like we actually get to go up to these farms and harvest ourselves. And yeah, just like a couple weeks ago, we were at a partner farm, and it's just really cool to be able to bring the guys to a farm, like freeze that material on site and then bring it back to our lab, extract it the same day, like so fresh. I don't know any manufacturer, in any industry that can go to the farm, harvest their own stuff, and then extract it the same day. Like it just doesn't work. But we're in such a nice like region, and we've designed our teams accordingly. Like it's just, I think that's why we're winning awards. To be honest, it's nothing like, it's no like silver bullet. It's just freshness, you know.
You're winning awards because you're doing it for the right reasons, man. You guys grew up in it. You figured it out. You're passionate about it. You're bringing the right people into the fold, and that's why you're winning awards, man. Like I said, I think you are a spotlight in the cannabis industry. I'm glad that, you know, Cynthia introduced us, and I'm excited to continue to watch what you're doing. I mean, you've been very successful at this point behind the scenes, and I'm excited for you guys to come out in front and say, hey, we're here. We're representing Humboldt to be another one that's putting Humboldt on the map. I think is really cool, man. We've been talking for an hour.
All right.
Yeah. I've got to eat dinner because I'm starving. But this has been a hell of a conversation. Before I let you go, let's get any promo out there, promote the brand, websites, social media, anything you got.
Yeah, well, the brand's called Arcata Fire. It's kind of an ode to some of the old school farmers who are also firemen. So, you know, we'd be up there and all of a sudden you'd see a fire, and all of a sudden all the growers would put all their, you know, fire stuff on and become firemen, because like no one was taking care of anyone's shit back then, other than, you know, the guys who were living there. And, you know, right now with the fires the way they are, it's crazy. So yeah, we're going to be running some promotions, just selling carts and donating some proceeds to local volunteer fire departments, just to try to like protect some of these communities that are growing such good flower. But if you guys want to check out the website, it's alwaysthefire.com. Yeah, we're definitely on like weed maps and stuff like that. You can find us, and most regions now you can find us either in delivery or in a retailer. And just shoot me a note if you want, info@ArcataX.com. And if you're looking for it, I can definitely point you in the right direction.
Very cool, man. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we'll definitely have you back, and hopefully we'll do this out in your hometown.
Yeah, brother. Yeah, no, I look forward to our next one.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody at home for watching. I love this conversation. These are the conversations that I love having. I hope you learned a thing or two about the industry and the way that it should be, folks. Of course, if you missed any part of this episode, you can catch it live on our YouTube channel next week, youtube.com/elevateyourgrind. And of course, all your podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, you guys know the list. Of course, this episode was brought to you by Contempo Specialty Packaging. Check them out at contempopackaging.com. Join us at Join CLab.com to see all the upcoming events, folks. We'll be live again with you, I believe, Thursday at 2 p.m. Look forward to seeing you then.